The crosshairs trembled against the Afghan horizon as 18-year-old Kira Ashford studied her breathing, watching an impossible target through a rifle scope that cost more than her family's entire cattle herd. 4,820 meters away, nearly 3 miles of howling wind, shifting thermals, and mathematical
We need to
improbability,
address the
a
operational
terrorist
challenges we've
coordinator
been facing
emerged
and
from a
come up with
concrete
actionable
bunker, unaware that a
solutions by the end
Montana
of this
ranch girl
briefing.
was about to rewrite every manual on military marksmanship. But this moment didn't begin in the mountains of Afghanistan. It began 6 months earlier under the endless sky of Montana, where dreams died as slowly as cattle in a drought. Kira Ashford had spent the morning of her 18th birthday stacking hay bales under a sun that offered heat, but no mercy. The Mitchell Ranch, her family had called it Ashford Ranch for 4 generations, now sprawled across 2,800 acres of rolling Montana hills, stubborn grass, and memories that went back to the 1880s. Her rifle, a Winchester Model 70 and .270 caliber that had belonged to her grandfather Nathaniel, leaned against a fence post worn smooth by decades of use. 800 yards away, a jackrabbit poked its head above a cluster of sagebrush ears, twitching in the afternoon heat. Kira wiped sweat from her forehead with a work-gloved hand and reached for the Winchester. The woodstock settled into her shoulder like it had been carved specifically for her frame, which in a way it had been. Nathaniel Ashford had built this rifle in 1952, the year he came home from a war he never discussed. He'd passed it to her father, who'd passed it to her when she turned 12, the same age Nathaniel had been when he first picked up a rifle in the Montana wilderness. The scope found the jackrabbit. Kira's breathing slowed to the rhythm her grandfather had taught her: steady inhale, partial exhale, hold. She calculated windage by watching the grass bend, estimated the mild thermal rise from the sun-baked ground, and adjusted for the slight downhill angle. The mathematics happened in her mind faster than conscious thought, like her brain processed trajectories in a language she'd been born speaking. The shot broke clean. 800 yards away, the jackrabbit dropped without knowing death had been watching. "Show off," muttered her younger brother Cole, appearing from behind the barn with a bucket of grain for the horses. At 17, Cole had inherited their father's broad shoulders and their mother's practical stubbornness, but he lacked Kira's supernatural connection with long-range shooting. He was a good shot, better than most hunters in 3 counties, but Kira operated on a different plane entirely. "Dad wants you," Cole continued, setting down the bucket. "Bank called again. He's in the office with Mom, and they've got that look." That look, Kira had seen it increasingly over the past 2 years, the expression of people watching something precious slip through their fingers despite their best efforts. The drought had lasted 30 months longer than anyone predicted. Cattle prices had collapsed when the feed costs skyrocketed. The bank had been patient then, understanding, then coldly professional. Now they were just cold. Kira shouldered her rifle and followed Cole toward the house, a weathered 2-story structure that had sheltered Ashfords through the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and every economic downturn Montana could throw at a family stubborn enough to stay. The wood siding needed paint. The roof needed replacing. The foundation needed, well, everything needed something the family couldn't afford. Inside, her parents sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where 3 generations had planned futures in weathered crises. Her father, Wyatt Ashford, spread papers across the wood grain with the careful movements of a man who'd injured his back working oil rigs and never quite healed right. At 46, he looked 60, weathered by hard country and harder choices. Her mother, Marlene, reached across to squeeze her husband's calloused hand. At 44, she still had the quiet strength that came from raising children in unforgiving land while making impossible budgets stretched to cover basic necessities. She taught 4th grade in Billings, a 40-minute drive each way, because the ranch income alone hadn't supported the family in 15 years. "The numbers don't lie," Wyatt said quietly, his voice carrying the resignation of a man stating facts rather than fighting them. "We've got 75 days before the bank takes the ranch. I can pick up evening shifts at the hardware store, but it won't be enough. Not nearly enough." $195,000 in debt. Kira had seen their foreclosure notice tucked behind the sugar canister where her mother thought no one would find it. She'd done the math. The signing bonuses the Army offered for specialized programs could cover more than half that amount. "The Army recruiter's coming to Billings High tomorrow," Kira said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. "Sergeant Brennan. He said exceptional shooters can qualify for enhanced programs with substantial financial compensation." Wyatt looked up sharply. Kira, you're 18 years old. You've never been further from home than Bozeman. The military isn't. I can outshoot every hunter in 5 counties, Kira replied, meeting her father's gaze steadily. Grandpa Nate taught me that skill is currency. Maybe it's time I spent some of mine. The silence stretched long enough for the grandfather clock in the hallway to chime 5 times. Finally, Marlene spoke, her voice careful. What kind of programs are we talking about? Kira had spent the previous evening researching on the ancient laptop that took 5 minutes to load a web page. Sniper training, Army marksmanship unit, special operations support, the kind of programs that come with signing bonuses substantial enough to matter. Cole leaned forward, his eyes bright with something between excitement and worry. You mean like military sniper school? That's serious, Kira. I'm a serious shooter, Kira replied simply, and serious problems require serious solutions. Wyatt pushed back from the table and walked to the window overlooking the fields where 4 generations of his family had worked land that gave grudgingly and took freely. He stood there for a long moment, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Your great-grandfather fought in World War I, he said without turning. Your grandfather, my father, served in World War II. I did 3 years in the Marines during the Gulf War. Now he turned to face his daughter. Military service changes you, Kira. It takes something from you, even when it gives something back. Your grandfather came home from Europe in 1945 and never spoke about what he did over there. Not once in 70 years. Those kinds of silences carry weight. Maybe, Kira said quietly, but sitting here watching the ranch die slowly is taking something from all of us. At least military service gives something in return. The next morning, Kira drove the family's battered pickup truck to Billings High School, where Sergeant First Class Marcus Brennan had set up a recruitment table in the gymnasium where she'd played basketball for 4 years. The same gym where she delivered the valedictorian speech 3 weeks earlier about pursuing dreams despite obstacles. Now those words felt prophetic in ways she hadn't intended. Brennan was perhaps 35 with the controlled intensity that came from years of military precision. His dress uniform was crisp despite the late spring heat, and his presentation covered standard enlistment options, military occupational specialties, and educational benefits, with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd given this speech 1,000 times. But when Kira approached his table afterward carrying a folder of her shooting records and competition scores, his entire demeanor shifted. These scores real? Brennan asked, scanning the documentation Kira had compiled. 870 yards sub-2-inch groups, consistent first-round hits at 1,200 yards with a hunting rifle, win compensation calculations at this level. He looked up, his eyes sharp with professional interest. Every score witnessed and documented. State Championship Committee verified everything, Kira replied. I can demonstrate if necessary. Brennan studied her for a long moment, taking in her steady hands, her direct eye contact, and the quiet confidence that radiated from her 5'7" frame. At 135 pounds, Kira Ashford didn't look like a typical military recruit, but something in her bearing suggested depths that weren't immediately visible. Miss Ashford, Brennan said slowly, how much do you know about military sniper programs? I know they're looking for exceptional marksmen with the mental discipline to perform under extreme pressure. I know the Army Marksmanship Unit represents the pinnacle of military shooting sports, and I know specialized programs come with specialized compensation. They also come with specialized risks, Brennan said seriously. Sniper training isn't summer camp. It's designed to break people who think they're tough enough to handle anything. The dropout rate exceeds 70%. Kira met his gaze without flinching. Sergeant, I've been supporting my family's ranch since I was 12 years old. I've put meat on our table through hunting since I was 14. I've won every major shooting competition within 300 miles of here for the past 4 years. I don't break easily. Brennan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or calculation. He pulled out a card from his uniform pocket, considered it for a moment, then slid it across the table. There's a qualifying shoot at Fort Harrison next week, he said quietly. Prospective candidates for advanced marksmanship programs. You show up with documented proof of your abilities, be the initial screening, and I'll personally ensure your application gets serious consideration. Kira took the card, standard Army contact information on one side, But on the other hand, written in neat block letters, call this number if you score expert. Ask for Colonel Drummond. What's the screening involved? Kira asked. Standard marksmanship evaluation at distances up to 800 meters. Basic physical fitness requirements. Psychological evaluation to assess suitability for high-stress military occupations. Brennan paused, then added carefully, Miss Ashford, one more question. Your last name, any relation to Nathaniel Ashford, served with the 2nd Rangers European Theater, 1943 to 1945. Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach. That was my grandfather. He passed in 2016. How do you know that name? Brennan's face revealed nothing. Just making conversation. Military families interest me. He extended his hand for a firm handshake. Good luck at Fort Harrison, Miss Ashford. Something tells me you're going to do just fine. As Kira turned to leave, she felt Brennan's eyes following her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation had been about more than standard recruitment. That her grandfather's name had triggered something, some recognition, some flag in a system she didn't understand. The drive back to the ranch gave Kira 3 hours to contemplate the magnitude of what she was considering. The Montana landscape rolled past her pickup's windows, endless wheat fields, turning gold under the afternoon sun, distant mountain ranges still carrying snow on their peaks, and the kind of open space that made a person feel simultaneously infinite and insignificant. This was home, the only world she'd ever known. Leaving it would mean abandoning everything familiar. The smell of hay after summer rain, the sound of wind through the cottonwoods along the creek, the exact angle of light that painted the crazy mountains purple at sunset. But staying would mean watching her family lose everything they'd built across 4 generations. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend since elementary school, Emma Rodriguez, who was heading to the University of Montana in the fall on a partial scholarship. How'd the military thing go? Still think you're crazy, but I support your crazy. Kira smiled despite the churning in her gut. Emma had been the voice of reason to Kira's impulsive decisiveness for as long as she could remember. They'd spent countless hours together in the mountains, Emma handling the planning and logistics, while Kira handled the hunting and outdoor survival aspects of their adventures. Another text appeared. Seriously though, you're one of the smartest people I know. Military might be perfect for you. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. The right reasons. Kira considered this as she turned onto the gravel road leading to her family's property. Was financial necessity the right reason? Was the desire to use her shooting skills professionally the right reason? Was the restless feeling that Montana, despite its beauty, was too small to contain? Whatever was building inside her, was that the right reason? Her grandfather's voice echoed in memory from one of the rare times he'd discussed anything approaching philosophy. Skill without purpose is just showing off, Kira, but skill applied to something important that can change the world. The next morning, Kira woke before dawn, as was her habit since childhood. The ranch demanded early rising animals didn't care about sleep schedules or weekend plans, but instead of heading to the barn for morning chores, she found herself drawn to the old storage shed at the far edge of the property. The wooden structure had been built by her great-grandfather in the 1920s, and in recent years served mainly for storing old equipment and family keepsakes deemed too valuable to discard but not practical enough to keep in the house. Kira had always loved the musty, timeless smell of the place, aged wood-old leather, and the accumulated weight of family history. The padlock was stiff with disuse, but the key still turned. Inside, dust motes danced in beams of early morning light, filtering through weathered planks. Kira moved carefully among stacked furniture, old trunks and farm implements that hadn't been used in decades. In the back corner sat an olive-drab military footlocker she recognized as her grandfather Nathaniel's. She'd seen it before, but had never explored its contents, some unspoken family understanding that Nathaniel's war belonged to him alone, buried with him in the veterans' cemetery outside Billings. But now, with the possibility of her own military service looming, Kira felt drawn to it. The brass latch was tarnished but opened easily under her touch. Inside lay neatly folded uniforms, still carrying the ghost scent of mothballs medals in velvet cases and a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. But what caught Kira's eye was a brass compass wedged against the side of the trunk. She pulled it free, feeling its weight in her palm. The mechanism still worked, the needle swinging true to magnetic north. But it was the engraving on the back that made her breath catch. True aim serves the heart. 1944, Nathaniel Ashford. Her grandfather's handwriting, she recognized it from the rare birthday cards he'd written before arthritis and dementia made writing difficult in his final years. But the date, the height of World War II. What had he been doing that required a compass? Where had he been when he had had this engraved? Kira continued exploring the trunk. Beneath the uniforms, she found a photo album with black and white images from the war years. Young Nathaniel in combat fatigues, impossibly young. He couldn't have been more than 22 in these photos. Several showed him with a rifle she didn't recognize, something longer and heavier than standard infantry weapons. In one image, he was positioned behind sandbags, the rifle mounted on a bipod, his eye to a scope, as he looked across what appeared to be French countryside. There were other photos too. Nathaniel with other soldiers, most of them looking as young and uncertain as he did. One particular image showed him receiving a medal from a stern-looking officer, but the caption had been torn away. At the bottom of the trunk, Kira found a yellowed newspaper clipping carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. The headline read, "Local Hero Returns from European Theater." The article was brief, mentioning that Lieutenant Nathaniel Ashford had received commendations for exceptional service during the preparations for Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion. But the details were vague, speaking only of crucial tactical support during sensitive operations. No specifics, no descriptions of what he'd actually done. Kira sat back on her heels, the compass still in her hand, and felt the weight of mysteries she'd never questioned. Her grandfather had been a soldier. Yes, everyone knew that. But this evidence suggested he'd been something more, something specialized, something he'd chosen to never discuss, even with family. She carefully replaced the items in the trunk, but she couldn't resist slipping the compass into her jacket pocket. Something told her she might need its guidance in the days ahead. The inscription resonated in a way she couldn't quite articulate. True aim serves the heart. What had her grandfather's heart served? What would hers, the Fort Harrison qualifying, shoot took place on a gray Tuesday morning in early June, with Kira arriving before dawn to find 22 other candidates already assembling equipment. The group was predominantly male, mostly ages 19 to 25, with several obvious military brats who carried themselves with inherited confidence. Only two other women were present. One was Blair Hutchins, a 26-year-old Air Force ROTC candidate from Texas with expensive equipment and an attitude to match. The other was a quiet National Guard specialist from Wyoming who kept to herself. Kira set up her shooting position, methodically arranging her gear with the same careful attention to detail she'd applied to ranch work for years. Her rifle was older than most of the competition's equipment, the same Winchester Model 70 she'd used for hunting, but she'd modified and tuned it until every component performed flawlessly. "First time at one of these evaluations?" Blair asked, looking over Kira's setup with barely concealed condescension. "I'm Blair Hutchins, University of Texas ROTC program." "That's quite a rifle. Hunting rifle, right? Most of us are using precision target systems for this level of evaluation." "Kira Ashford," she replied, adjusting her scope's focus. "First time, yes." Blair studied Kira's Winchester with the expression of someone examining a museum piece. "That old .270 won't hold up past 600 yards against our match-grade equipment. No offense, but you're outgunned before you start. Most people aren't consistently hitting 800-yard targets with hunting rifles," Kira replied pleasantly. "But I suppose we'll see how everyone performs." The evaluation began with standard marksmanship tests at 200, 400, and 600 meters. Kira's shots grouped tightly at each distance, her technique drawing attention from the evaluating instructors. Master Sergeant Orette Sullivan, a lean man in his late 40s with buzz-cut gray hair and the weathered hands that spoke of decades handling weapons, began timing Kira's target acquisitions and noting her shooting positions. Sullivan wore combat patches from Desert Storm, and he moved with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned that wasted motion could cost lives. His eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and they missed nothing. "Ashford," Sullivan called out after her 600-meter string, his voice carrying the rough authority of a career NCO. "You're shooting offhand stances I don't recognize from standard military training manuals. Self-taught technique. Hunting in Montana requires adapting to terrain and conditions that don't always accommodate textbook positions, Sergeant," Kira replied, making her rifle safe and standing. Sullivan made additional notes on his evaluation sheet. "Show me your 800-meter grouping." The 800-meter target stretched the abilities of several candidates. Kira watched Blair Hutchins struggle with wind compensation, saw two candidates fail to achieve acceptable accuracy, and noticed one shooter actually hit an adjacent target frame entirely. When her turn came, Kira settled into a prone position, checked her scope settings against the wind flags, and began her breathing routine. The first shot struck dead center. The second shot adjusted for a subtle wind change she'd felt rather than calculated, hit less than an inch away. The third, fourth, and fifth shots created a group that could be covered with a quarter. "Jesus Christ," muttered one of the other candidates, a stocky kid from Minnesota. "Did she just shoot sub-MOA at 800 meters with a hunting rifle?" Sullivan lowered his spotting scope and walked over to Kira's position, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with interest. "Ashford, where did you learn to read wind at extended range?" he asked quietly. "Hunting elk in mountain conditions." "Sergeant," Kira replied, beginning to clean her rifle with practice motions. "Montana wind changes constantly. You learn to read it or you go home empty-handed." "And where did you learn to compensate for temperature and altitude variables?" Kira paused her cleaning routine. "Trial and error, mostly. Some internet research. Lots of practice." She looked up at Sullivan. "Is that a problem, Sergeant?" Sullivan's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in those winter blue eyes, recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. "Ashford, what you just did doesn't happen by accident. Sub-minute of angle accuracy at 800 meters requires understanding of ballistics atmospheric conditions in rifle mechanics that most people don't develop without formal training or natural aptitude that borders on instinctive." "I had training, Sergeant. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. My father taught me to hunt when I was 12. Montana taught me everything else." Sullivan studied her for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. Then almost casually he asked, "Your grandfather was Nathaniel Ashford?" Kira felt a chill run down her spine despite the June heat. "Yes, Sergeant. Did you know him?" "Never met him personally," Sullivan said, his tone careful, "but I've heard the name. Certain circles in the military, certain names carry weight." He turned as if to move to the next shooter, then paused. "Your grandfather left something with someone I know. Asked that it be delivered if an Ashford ever showed his level of aptitude. I'll see that you get it." Before Kira could respond, Sullivan had moved on, leaving her with more questions than answers. The psychological evaluation took place that afternoon in a sterile conference room where Kira faced 3 evaluators, a military psychologist, a veteran sniper instructor, and a medical officer whose credentials weren't specified. The questions started standard stress management, decision-making under pressure, motivations for military service. But then the medical officer asked something that made Kira's instincts prickle with warning. "Miss Ashford, have you ever experienced unusual visual processing abilities, enhanced perception of movement, seeing trajectories appear in your mind before you consciously calculate them?" Kira thought of the thousands of shots she'd made where the solution had simply appeared in her consciousness, complete and certain, before her rational mind had finished the mathematics. She thought of her grandfather's compass with its cryptic inscription. She thought of Sergeant Brennan's carefully neutral expression when he'd recognized the Ashford name. "I've always had good eyesight and strong spatial awareness," she answered carefully. "It helps with shooting." The officer made a note without commenting further, but Kira saw him exchange a glance with the psychologist, a look that said volumes she couldn't interpret. After 3 hours of questioning, Kira was dismissed with instructions to wait for evaluation results. She spent the remainder of the afternoon in Great Falls, walking through the city's downtown area and marveling at how many people could be crowded into relatively small spaces. After years of Montana's vast emptiness, even a modest city felt overwhelming. Her phone rang as she sat in a diner picking at a hamburger while watching traffic pass outside the window. "Kira, it's Sergeant Brennan from the recruitment office." His voice carried a note of controlled excitement. "I just received your evaluation results from Fort Harrison." Kira's pulse quickened. "And Ashford, in 15 years of coordinating these evaluations, I've never seen scores like yours. You didn't just qualify for advanced marksmanship programs, you shattered every evaluation standard we have." Brennan paused for effect. "There are people at Fort Benning, Georgia, who want to meet you immediately. They're offering immediate acceptance into the most selective shooting program in the military with a signing bonus that would clear your family's ranch debt and then some." "Fort Benning. home of the Army Ranger School, the Army Marksmanship Unit, and various special operations training programs. The kind of place where careers were made or destroyed, where the margin between excellence and failure measured in fractions of an inch. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Kira asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Basic training starts in 6 weeks. If you accept, you'd ship out for Fort Benning immediately after completion. The whole process takes about 9 months before you're assigned to an operational unit. 9 months to transform from Montana ranch girl to military sniper. 9 months to develop skills that could support her family and serve her country. 9 months to discover if her natural abilities could translate to professional excellence in the highest stakes environment imaginable. Sergeant Brennan, I'll need to discuss this with my family, but I'm very interested. Understood. Ashford, one more thing. Brennan's voice dropped slightly, becoming more serious. The evaluation team noted something unusual about your shooting style and processing speed. They said you seem to intuitively understand ballistic principles that take most people years to learn through formal study. Don't let anyone convince you that's not valuable. In fact, it's exactly what they're looking for. After hanging up, Kira sat in the diner booth, turning her grandfather's compass over and over in her hands. The afternoon sun caught the brass, sending glints of light dancing across the worn tabletop. The engraving stared up at her. True aim serves the heart, not just the eye. What had Nathaniel Ashford's heart served? What had he aimed at across the battlefields of Europe? And why did everyone in the military seem to recognize his name with a mixture of respect and careful silence? That evening, Master Sergeant Sullivan appeared at the ranch just as the sun was setting behind the crazy mountains. He drove a nondescript sedan, not a military vehicle, and he was in civilian clothes, jeans, a work shirt, and worn boots that looked comfortable rather than tactical. Kira met him on the porch, her father appearing in the doorway behind her with the protective wariness of any parent watching their daughter interact with a stranger. Miss Ashford, Sullivan said, nodding respectfully to Wyatt as well. I have something that belongs to you, or rather something your grandfather wanted you to have. He produced a manila envelope creased and worn with, "For Kira Ashford, when she's ready," written on the front in handwriting Kira didn't recognize. Your grandfather gave this to someone I knew in 1998, Sullivan explained. I was a young specialist stationed at Fort Bragg after several Desert Storm-era rotations. An old man approached me, said his name was Nathaniel Ashford. We talked for hours about long-range shooting. He gave me this envelope with very specific instructions. If an Ashford ever showed aptitude matching his, this was to be delivered. Your performance today, well, you more than qualified. Inside the envelope, Kira found black and white photographs of her grandfather from the war years. But these were different from the ones in his footlocker. These showed Nathaniel in specialized positions behind long rifles, studying maps with officers examining equipment she'd never seen before. There were also papers, handwritten ballistic tables dated 1943 and 1944, with calculations that Kira recognized as extraordinarily advanced for that era. Wind compensation formulas, trajectory tables for ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, temperature and altitude adjustment charts that wouldn't become standard in civilian shooting until decades later. And at the bottom, a yellowed newspaper clipping different from the one she'd found. This one was from a military publication dated June 1944. The headline read, "Specialized Unit Provides Crucial Support in Normandy Preparation." The article was heavily redacted, but one paragraph remained visible. Lieutenant Nathaniel Ashford's precision work at extreme ranges contributed significantly to Operation Overlord preparations, though details remain classified for security purposes. His performance under pressure established new benchmarks for tactical marksmanship. Kira looked up at Sullivan, questions flooding her mind. What did he do? Sullivan's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried the weight of someone sharing information that existed in gray areas of classification. I can't tell you everything because I don't know everything, but I can tell you that your grandfather was part of something special, something that identified individuals with unique aptitudes for precision shooting, people who processed visual information differently, who understood trajectories and environmental effects at an intuitive level. And you think I have this aptitude? I think your scores today speak for themselves, Sullivan replied. I think the people at Fort Benning have been waiting for someone like you. And I think your grandfather knew even back in the 1940s that whatever made him exceptional might show up again in his family line. He turned to leave, then paused at the porch steps. One piece of advice, Miss Ashford. If you do this, if you go down this path, be very careful about who you trust. There are people who will want to study you, use you, push you toward things that might not be in your best interest. Your grandfather understood that. That's why he left you these materials to prepare you, but also to warn you. After Sullivan drove away, Kira and her father sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, looking through the photographs and documents. Wyatt was quiet for a long time before speaking. Dad never talked about the war, he said finally. Once in my entire life. I asked him about it when I was maybe 10 years old, and he got this look like he was seeing something far away and painful. He just said, some things we do in service need to stay buried, son. Just know that when I pulled a trigger, I made damn sure I was pulling it for the right reasons. Kira touched the compass in her pocket, feeling its weight like a connection across decades. What do you think he meant? I think he meant that skill is one thing, but purpose is what matters. And I think he meant that every shot he took, every decision he made carried weight that lasted long after the war ended. Wyatt looked at his daughter in the fading light. If you do this, Kira, if you follow in his footsteps, remember that. The skill is just a tool. It's what you aim at, and why that defines who you become. 3 weeks later, Kira Ashford stood in the parking lot of Billings High School, saying goodbye to Emma Rodriguez before shipping out to Fort Benning for basic training. Emma hugged her hard enough to crack ribs. Promise me you'll stay yourself, Emma said fiercely. Don't let them turn you into some kind of killing machine. You're Kira Ashford, ranch girl, state champion. My best friend who cried during the notebook and won't kill spiders because they're just doing their spider jobs. Kira laughed despite the tears threatening. I promise, but I think I need to do this. Not just for the ranch, though. God knows we need the money. But because there's something in me, something from Grandpa Nate that I need to understand. I know, Emma replied. I can see it. Just come back whole, okay? Come back still, you. The signing bonus had indeed cleared the ranch debt with money to spare. Her family's home was saved. But as Kira boarded the bus that would take her to the military processing station, then on to basic training, she understood that saving the ranch was just the surface reason for her choice. The deeper truth lay in that compass, in those photographs, in the mystery of who Nathaniel Ashford had really been and what he'd really done in the shadows of World War II. And in the growing certainty that whatever had made him exceptional, whatever gift or curse had allowed him to see the world through a marksman's eyes now lived in her. True aim serves the heart. She was about to discover what her heart was willing to aim at and what price she'd pay for pulling the trigger. Fort Benning, Georgia hit Kira Ashford like a wall of heat and humidity the moment she stepped off the bus. The air felt thick enough to drink nothing like Montana's dry mountain climate. 200 recruits stood in formation on the tarmac, and Drill Sergeant Patricia Vance, a compact woman whose intensity made up for what she lacked in height, paced before them like a predator assessing prey. Welcome to the United States Army, Vance announced, her voice carrying across the formation without needing amplification. Some of you think you're here because you're tough. Some think you're here because you're smart. Some think you're special. Her gaze swept across the recruits. You're all wrong. You're here because the Army needs bodies, and right now you're just bodies. Whether you become soldiers depends entirely on whether you can follow instructions and survive the next 9 weeks without quitting. Basic training proved to be exactly what Kira expected, a methodical process of breaking down civilian habits and rebuilding recruits as soldiers. The physical training challenged her in new ways. Ranch work had made her strong, but military fitness required different muscle groups and endurance patterns. She ran until her lungs burned, did push-ups until her arms trembled, and learned to function on 4 hours of sleep while maintaining full alertness. But it was weapons training where Kira truly distinguished herself. Ashford, step up to the firing line, Drill Sergeant Vance barked during their 3rd week. Let's see if Montana farm girls can hang with real soldiers. Kira approached the firing line carrying the standard M4 carbine, a weapon significantly different from her familiar Winchester, but operating on the same fundamental principles. Around her, fellow recruits struggled with basic marksmanship concepts, fighting their weapons instead of working with them. The target stood at 300 meters a distance, Kira considered practically point-blank range. She settled into a stable shooting position, adjusted for the slight crosswind that nobody else seemed to notice, and began engaging targets with mechanical precision. The M4's report was sharper than her hunting rifle, the recoil different, but her body adapted automatically. Sight alignment, breathing control, trigger press, follow-through. The fundamentals remained constant, regardless of the weapon. "Cease fire," Sergeant Vance called after Kira had emptied her magazine. "Ashford, safe your rifle and step back." The target retrieval revealed something that made several drill sergeants gather at the scoring table. Kira had achieved a perfect expert marksmanship qualification score at a distance where many recruits struggled to hit the target frame at all. "Ashford," Sergeant Vance said, her voice carefully neutral, "have you fired military weapons before today?" "No, Sergeant. First time." "Then explain to me how you just shot expert marksman scores on your first military qualification attempt." Kira considered her answer carefully. "Sergeant, the principles are the same regardless of the weapon. Sighted alignment, breathing control, trigger discipline, and follow-through. The M4 just applies those principles with different specifications." Word of Kira's shooting abilities spread quickly through the training battalion. By the end of her first week, instructors from advanced programs were reviewing her scores and requesting additional evaluations. She found herself caught between the standard recruit training schedule and special assessments designed to measure her potential for specialized programs. Her bunkmate, Private Rachel Morgan from Oregon, watched this attention with a mixture of awe and concern. "Ashford, you're drawing serious notice," Rachel said one evening as they cleaned weapons. "Good attention, but still attention. Some people around here don't appreciate recruits who stand out." "I'm not trying to stand out," Kira replied, field stripping her rifle for the third time that evening to ensure perfect cleanliness. "I'm just doing my best." "I know," Rachel said with a slight smile. "That's exactly what makes it work." The advanced marksmanship evaluation came during Kira's 6th week of basic training. Instead of the standard training range, she found herself at a specialized facility with distances extending beyond anything she'd experienced in civilian competition. The evaluating team included Master Sergeant Sullivan from Fort Harrison, along with several instructors whose credentials suggested deep special operations backgrounds. Ashford Sullivan began without preamble. "Today's evaluation will test your abilities at distances up to 1,200 meters using precision rifle systems. You'll be evaluated on accuracy, target acquisition speed, and adaptability to unfamiliar equipment." The precision rifle was a custom .308 system with an advanced scope and bipod significantly heavier and more complex than anything Kira had used previously. She spent 30 minutes familiarizing herself with the weapon's feel and function, learning its balance point trigger pull, weight, and how the scope tracked. The first target stood at 800 meters familiar territory. Kira's shots grouped within 2 inches of center, tight enough to impress the veteran instructors watching through spotting scopes. The second target at 1,000 meters required adjustments for wind and elevation she'd never attempted with military equipment. Her first shot missed, left by 6 inches. The wind had shifted between her red and her trigger press. Her second shot corrected for the change and struck center mass. Her remaining shots created a group that made Sullivan lower his binoculars with an expression somewhere between disbelief and confirmation. "Ashford, step up to the 1,200-meter line," Sullivan instructed. 1,200 meters was beyond anything Kira had attempted, even in civilian competition. She studied the target through her scope, calculating wind patterns from 3 different flags along the range, estimating bullet drop using principles she'd learned through years of practice, but never applied at such extreme range. Her first shot struck the target 8 inches high. She'd underestimated the wind effect at mid-range. Her second shot, adjusted for both drop and drift, hit 4 inches left of center. Her third shot found the bullseye. "Time," Sullivan called out. "Ashford, safe your rifle and step back." The scoring process took longer than usual, with instructors using laser rangefinders to verify distances and measuring tools to confirm group sizes. When Sullivan approached Kira with the results, his expression was carefully controlled. "Ashford, your 1,200-meter group measured 11 inches. For perspective, that's within acceptable combat accuracy at a distance where most experienced military marksmen struggle to hit the target consistently." He paused. "Where did you learn to adapt to unfamiliar weapon systems this quickly?" "I didn't learn it, Sergeant. I just applied the principles my grandfather taught me and adjusted for what the rifle wanted to do." Sullivan studied her intently. "What the rifle wanted to do? That's an interesting way to phrase it." My grandfather used to say every weapon has its own personality. The best shooters don't fight those tendencies, they work with them. Something flickered in Sullivan's eyes, recognition, perhaps, of words he had heard before from another Ashford. Your grandfather was a wise man. Finished basic training like every other recruit, Ashford. But after graduation, you'll be reporting directly to the Special Operations Training course for advanced sniper instruction. The remainder of basic training passed in a blur of standard military instruction, punctuated by additional evaluations and specialized training modules. Kira excelled in all areas, but her marksmanship scores became legendary among the training staff. By graduation day, she held the highest shooting scores in Fort Benning's basic training history. Her family made the trip from Montana for the ceremony, 19 hours of driving, split across 2 days. Seeing her parents and Cole in the crowd of families, Kira felt the full weight of what she'd undertaken. This wasn't just career training. It was a fundamental transformation of her life's direction. We're proud of you, Marlene said during the brief family visit, aloud after the ceremony, pulling Kira into a fierce hug. But we're also scared for you, honey. I'm scared too, Kira admitted, but I'm more excited than scared. Cole handed his sister a small package wrapped in brown paper. From Grandpa Nate's footlocker. Mom said you should have it now that you're really doing this. Inside was a second compass, identical to the one Kira already carried. The engraving on the back read, "For the one who follows, may you aim true, N.A. 1952. Kira looked at her mother with questions in her eyes. We found it after you left for basic, Marlene explained quietly. There was a note with it. Your grandfather wrote that he'd commissioned 2 compasses made in 1944. One for himself, one for whichever descendant inherited his gift. He believed it would skip at least one generation. He believed it would be you. The Special Operations Training course began 2 weeks after basic training graduation, and Kiara immediately understood why the failure rate exceeded 70%. The course combined advanced marksmanship instruction with survival training, tactical planning, and psychological conditioning designed to simulate combat stress. Her fellow candidates included experienced soldiers seeking advancement, college graduates with military science degrees, and a few exceptional recruits like herself. One of those recruits was Specialist Bryce Calloway, a 24-year-old from Massachusetts who'd graduated from Boston College ROTC with honors in physics. Tall, lean, with the precise movements of someone who approached everything analytically, Calloway had requested assignment to this course specifically and had made it clear he didn't appreciate being partnered with an 18-year-old rookie. Listen, Ashford, Calloway said during their first day of team exercises, his tone professionally cold. I know you shot high scores in basic. That's great. But this is different. This is advanced tactical marksmanship where lives depend on teamwork and experience. I requested an experienced partner. Instead, I got you, so let's just be clear. I'll do my job, you do yours, and we'll get through this without drama. Kira met his gaze steadily. Understood. I'm here to learn and perform, not make friends. The first week covered theoretical foundations, ballistic science beyond anything taught in basic training, weather pattern recognition, target identification protocols, and the legal and ethical frameworks governing military snipers. Kira discovered that her intuitive understanding of these concepts gave her a significant advantage in the classroom portions, allowing her to focus on military-specific applications, while other candidates struggled with fundamental principles. The second week introduced practical applications at ranges up to 1,500 meters. Kira's performance continued to exceed expectations, though she began to understand the social dynamics that came with consistent excellence. Some candidates respected her abilities and sought her guidance. Others, like Calloway, resented what they perceived as effortless success. But there was one candidate whose resentment crossed into active hostility. Trent Vaughn was a 23-year-old from Virginia whose family had military connections going back 3 generations. His father had been a Marine officer, his grandfather an Army Ranger. Vaughn himself had played linebacker at Virginia Tech before enlisting, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything physical. Welcome to the big leagues, ranch girl, Vaughn said during the first live-fire exercise, deliberately positioning himself next to Kira's shooting station. Hope you're ready for some real shooting instead of plinking jackrabbits. Kira didn't respond to the provocation, focusing instead on the instructor's briefing about wind conditions and target distances. But she felt Vaughn's eyes on her assessing, looking for weakness. The course's third week introduced team exercises, two-person sniper teams with one shooter and one spotter, working together to engage targets at unknown distances under time pressure. The instructors deliberately paired candidates to create friction and test their ability to work through interpersonal challenges. Kira was paired with Calloway, which surprised neither of them. Ashford, I know I'm not your first choice as a partner, Calloway said, as they prepared for their first team exercise. And you're definitely not mine, but I'm excellent at range estimation, wind reading, and ballistic calculations. If you can trust my numbers and I can trust your shooting, I think we can perform well together despite our differences. The partnership proved more effective than either expected. Calloway's analytical approach to environmental factors complemented Kira's instinctive shooting abilities. His calculations were meticulous in accounting for variables most shooters overlooked. And when Kira made adjustments based on factors she felt rather than calculated, Calloway began to recognize that her intuition had a basis in processing environmental data faster than conscious thought could track. Their success began changing the dynamic. After their fourth consecutive exercise with near-perfect scores, Calloway's professional coldness started thawing into something approaching mutual respect. But Vaughn's hostility only intensified. It happened on the night before their fourth week's training was set to begin. Kira was working late in the armory, meticulously cleaning her assigned weapon. The building was nearly empty, most trainees having retired to their quarters. The metallic smell of gun oil and the rhythmic motion of the cleaning rod brought a sense of calm after the day's intensive drills. The door opened and Trent Vaughn entered his presence, immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. Working late, Ashford. His voice carried false casualness that put Kira on alert. Must be nice having everything come so easily while the rest of us are busting our asses. Kira didn't look up from her work. Nothing about this is easy, Vaughn. I work as hard as anyone else here. Sure you do. He moved closer, leaning against the workbench beside her. That's why the instructors can't stop talking about the prodigy from Montana. That's why Sullivan himself shows up to watch you shoot. You know what I think? I think there's something else going on. Nobody gets the kind of attention you're getting without special connections or special treatment. Kira set down her cleaning rod and faced him directly. I don't have connections. I have skills developed over 10 years of practice. Vaughn laughed a short, ugly sound. Skills, right. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the Army being desperate to showcase female snipers for their diversity programs. It's all about your amazing skills. Kira felt her temper rising but kept her voice level. My scores speak for themselves, Vaughn. Every evaluation is documented and verified. For now, Vaughn said, pushing away from the bench. But eventually everyone shows their true limits, even prodigies. He headed for the door, then paused. Sleep tight, Ashford. Tomorrow's a big day. Wouldn't want anything to go wrong with your equipment. Something in his tone made Kira deeply uneasy. After he left, she spent 30 minutes carefully inspecting all her equipment, checking for signs of tampering. Everything appeared normal, but a sense of foreboding followed her back to her quarters. The fourth week introduced combat stress simulation engaging targets, while under physical and psychological pressure designed to replicate battlefield conditions. The first exercise involved a strenuous 10-mile movement with full gear, followed immediately by precision shooting at various ranges. Kira and Calloway reached their designated shooting position, exhausted but focused. As Kira set up her rifle, she noticed something that made her stomach clench. The scope's adjustment dials felt different, minutely off from where she'd left them during her final equipment check the previous evening. Calloway, she whispered urgently, check my scope settings. I think someone's tampered with it. Calloway examined the equipment with narrowed eyes, using a small reference card to verify the settings. The elevation's been altered by half a minute of angle, the windage too. It's subtle, wouldn't be noticeable unless you were intimately familiar with your setup. Kira immediately thought of Vaughn's veiled threat from the night before. Can we fix it? Yes, but we don't have the time to fully recalibrate before the exercise starts. You'll need to compensate mentally with each shot. The exercise began with Kira finding herself making mental adjustments for the sabotage scope settings with every engagement. Despite the tampering, she hit every target, though her groups weren't as tight as usual. Her brain worked overtime calculating not just the standard environmental variables, but also the scope's intentional misalignment. After completing the course, Kira reported the tampering to the senior instructor, Captain Lisa Rodriguez. Security footage review revealed Vaughn accessing the equipment locker during unauthorized hours. When confronted, he became defensive and revealed the depth of his hostility. "Women don't belong in special operations," he spat when Rodriguez showed him the video evidence. "Especially not teenage girls playing soldier. This is a man's world, and you're diluting standards to make political points." Captain Rodriguez's expression could have frozen steel. "That teenage girl outshot you with tampered equipment, Vaughn. You're done here. Report to the command sergeant major for disciplinary action." As Vaughn was escorted away, he turned to Kira with undisguised contempt. "You think this is just about me? There are plenty of people in this program who don't want you here. I'm just the one who got caught." Later that evening, Sullivan found Kira in the armory again, cleaning her rifle again, trying to process the day's events through familiar motions. "Ashford, I saw what happened today," Sullivan said, taking a seat on the bench across from her. "You should know that Vaughn isn't entirely wrong about one thing. There are elements within the military that resist change, especially regarding women in combat roles. You'll face that resistance throughout your career." Kira continued methodically cleaning her weapon. "With respect, Sergeant, I don't particularly care what those elements think. My scores and performance speak for themselves." Sullivan studied her for a moment. "They do, but be prepared, this won't be the last time someone tries to undermine you. How did you know your scope had been tampered with?" The adjustments Vaughn made were incredibly subtle. "Our investigation showed shifts of less than half a minute of angle." Kira paused, considering her answer carefully. She wasn't ready to discuss her grandfather's mysterious legacy or her apparent genetic advantages. "I just noticed it felt wrong when I looked through it. Something about the sight picture didn't match what I was expecting." Sullivan nodded slowly, clearly, not entirely satisfied with the explanation, but unwilling to press further. "Well, however you noticed it, you handled the situation perfectly. Exceptional shooters sometimes develop a sixth sense about their equipment." He stood to leave, then added, "You've been assigned to my team for deployment. Calloway as well. The three of us will deploy to Afghanistan in 8 weeks. Afghanistan, the word hung in the air like a promise and a threat. After months of training for this moment, the reality of combat deployment carried weight that no simulation could replicate. The final evaluation combined all previous training elements into a comprehensive test of sniper capabilities. Candidates would engage multiple targets at unknown ranges while receiving simulated indirect fire, working in two-person teams under time constraints that mimicked combat urgency. Kira and Calloway drew a challenging scenario targets at ranges from 600 to 1,400 meters, wind gusting to 35 knots, and simulated enemy fire requiring frequent position changes. As they settled into their initial shooting position, Kira felt the familiar calm that descended when she truly focused on marksmanship. This was where doubt disappeared, where the world narrowed to breath and trigger and target. "Range to primary target," Kira asked, settling behind her rifle. Calloway studied the distant target through his spotting scope, his mind already processing the complex mathematics of long-range shooting. 1,100 meters. Wind east-northeast at 28 knots, gusting to 35. Temperature differential indicates the bullet will drop approximately 18 inches below point of aim at this distance. Kira adjusted her scope and found her target through the reticle. The simulation began with artificial explosions and chaos designed to create stress and distraction. Through it all, Kira maintained her focus, engaging targets with mechanical precision, while Calloway called corrections and confirmed hits. "Target down," Calloway confirmed, and after Kira's shot at the 1,400-meter target. "Ashford, that was perfect wind and elevation compensation. I've never seen anyone adapt this quickly to changing conditions." They completed the exercise with perfect scores on all 6 targets, establishing a new course record for both accuracy and time. As they packed their equipment, Kira realized she'd found something unexpected in the military, a partnership based on mutual respect and complementary skills rather than competition. "Calloway," she said as they walked back to the equipment shed, "thank you for giving me a chance despite your initial reservations." Calloway was quiet for a moment. "Ashford, I need to tell you something. I didn't just request an experienced partner because I thought you were too young. I requested someone else because—" He paused, clearly struggling with whether to continue. "Because what? My older sister was killed by friendly fire 3 years ago. 2021 Syria. She was a Marine Corps officer convoy commander. Sniper from our own side mistook her vehicle for enemy, took a shot from 940 meters. Bad intelligence, worse judgment. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Kira could hear the pain underneath. The military told my family it was an experienced shooter, just a tragic mistake. Like that somehow made it acceptable. Kira felt understanding flood through her. And now you're spotting for someone who's inexperienced. Someone who could make the same mistake. Every time you aim at a target, I see Corporal Elise Calloway in someone's crosshairs, Calloway admitted. That's why I've been so hard on you. That's why I wanted someone with years of experience. Because mistakes at our level of work don't just affect us, they destroy families. Kira stopped walking and turned to face him. Then help me never make that mistake, Bryce. Your calculations and caution are exactly what I need to prevent me from becoming the shooter who killed your sister. I need you to keep me honest. Something shifted in Calloway's expression, a tension releasing a burden shared. I can do that, he said quietly. And for what it's worth, you're the most careful shooter I've ever worked with. You triple-check everything. That gives me confidence. The graduation ceremony for the Special Operations Training course was smaller and more subdued than basic training graduation. Only 8 candidates had successfully completed the program, and Kira was the youngest graduate by 3 years. She was also the only woman and the only candidate who'd entered directly from civilian life without prior military experience. Sullivan approached her after the ceremony carrying an official-looking folder. Ashford, your final scores broke multiple course records. Long-range accuracy, environmental adaptation, and team performance all exceeded previous benchmarks. He handed her the folder containing certification documents and deployment orders. You're being assigned to Afghanistan Forward Operating Base Chapman in Kunar Province. You'll be attached to an experienced team for your first operational deployment. Kira accepted the folder, feeling the weight of what it represented. When do we deploy, Sergeant? 8 weeks. Use the time to settle personal affairs and prepare mentally for extended combat operations. Kunar Province is one of the most active areas in Afghanistan. You'll be providing precision fire support in genuine combat conditions. Sullivan's expression grew serious. Ashford training is over. What comes next carries consequences that extend far beyond course grades. Calloway deploys with you, and I'll be team leader. Are you ready for that responsibility? I'm ready, Sergeant. Or at least I'm as ready as anyone can be for something they have never experienced. That evening, Kira called home from the base phone center. The conversation with her family was both celebratory and somber, acknowledging her success while recognizing the dangers inherent in her upcoming deployment. The bank restructured our loan based on your military income and signing bonus. Her father reported, his voice carrying relief mixed with worry. We're going to keep the ranch, Kira. You did that. You saved our home. How's Cole handling everything? Kira asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Your brother's proud of you, Marlene said. But he's also got ideas in his head now. Talks about enlisting when he turns 18 in January. Says if his sister can serve, so can he. Kira felt her stomach clench. The thought of Cole in combat, Cole facing the situation she was about to face, made her want to grab him and lock him in the ranch house until this madness passed. But she understood, his thinking understood it, because she'd followed the same logic herself. Tell him to finish high school first, Kira said finally. Tell him to really think about what he's signing up for. This isn't a game or an adventure. It's serious and it changes you. After hanging up, Kira sat alone in the phone center, turning both compasses over in her hands, her grandfather's original from 1944 and the twin he'd commissioned for her in 1952. 2 pieces of brass decades apart, connected by an inheritance she was only beginning to understand. Sullivan found her there an hour later. Thought I might find you here, he said, sitting down in the adjacent chair. Big day tomorrow, final equipment issue, medical checks, all the administrative details before deployment. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be, Kira replied. Sergeant, can I ask you something? When you said you'd heard of my grandfather in certain circles, what circles were those? Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. The kind of circles that don't officially exist. The kind where certain capabilities are identified, developed, and deployed for missions that never make it into official records. He met her eyes. Your grandfather was part of something called Operation Artemis. I'm not cleared to tell you more than that, and honestly, I don't know much more myself. But I know it identified individuals with unusual aptitudes for precision shooting. People who processed visual and spatial information differently than the general population. And you think I'm part of that same whatever it is. I think your performance speaks for itself. I think there are people at higher levels who've been watching your career with great interest since Fort Harrison. And I think you're about to step into a world where your abilities will be tested in ways training never could. Sullivan stood. Get some rest, Ashford. Afghanistan waits for no one, and she's a harsh teacher for those who arrive unprepared. But Kira couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what awaited her in Afghanistan. Combat, real enemies, real bullets, real consequences for success or failure. And somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains, targets she couldn't yet see, waiting for crosshairs they'd never know were trained on them. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind from one of the rare philosophical moments he'd shared before dementia took his memories. The shot is easy, Kira. Any fool can pull a trigger. It's knowing when to pull it and why, and living with what happens after. That's what makes a marksman worth the name. Tomorrow she would take the first steps on a path Nathaniel Ashford had walked 80 years earlier. A path that led through shadows and silence, through impossible shots and classified missions, through burdens that lasted lifetimes. True aim serves the heart. She was about to discover what her heart was truly aiming at and what price the shot would demand. The C-130 transport descended through turbulence that made Kira's stomach lurch as Afghanistan revealed itself through the small porthole window. Brown mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their peaks still holding snow despite the October heat. Scattered compounds dotted the valleys like stone cairns, marking ancient graves. Terraced fields clung to impossible slopes where farmers had coaxed life from unforgiving soil for thousands of years. This was the Hindu Kush, the land that had broken empires, swallowed armies, and tested every foreign force foolish enough to believe they could tame it. The soldier sitting across from Kira, a staff sergeant from the 101st Airborne, with 4 deployment patches on his sleeve, noticed her watching the landscape. "First deployment?" he asked over the engine noise. "Yes," Kira replied, still watching mountains that looked simultaneously beautiful and threatening. "Fourth time in country for me. Word of advice, Afghanistan will teach you things about yourself you never knew existed. Some good, some not so good. The key is figuring out which is which before it's too late." The temperature at Bagram Airfield hit Kira like opening an oven door. The air smelled of dust, diesel fuel, and something else she couldn't identify, but would later learn was the perpetual scent of a country where ancient traditions collided daily with modern warfare. The heat was different from Montana summer's drier, more oppressive, carrying the weight of sun, reflecting off bare rock and hard-packed earth. Sullivan met Kira and Calloway at the Arrival Processing Center, his uniform already showing the dust and wear that marked experienced deployed soldiers. "Welcome to the sandbox," he said, shouldering at his pack with practiced efficiency. "Transport to Chapman leaves in 40 minutes. Use the time to hydrate and do final gear checks. Once we're at the FOB, you'll be operating on mission schedule." The helicopter flight to Forward Operating Base Chapman took them over terrain that appeared both breathtaking and hostile. Jagged mountains rose in every direction, their slopes showing evidence of centuries of human habitation, terrace fields, stone villages, and paths that wound between valleys like rivers of packed earth. The Hindu Kush had been home to countless civilizations, and each had left its mark on the unforgiving landscape. "Population down there is mostly Pashtun tribal groups," Sullivan explained over the helicopter's engine noise, his voice crackling through the headset. "Some support the government, some support the Taliban, most just want to be left alone to tend their farms and raise their families. Our job is to distinguish between legitimate threats and civilians trying to survive in a war zone. That distinction matters more than your shooting skills." FOB Chapman occupied strategic high ground in Kannar province, 200 soldiers living in containerized housing units, surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Sullivan led them to their quarters, a modified shipping container divided into 3 sleeping areas with a common space for equipment, maintenance, and mission planning. Kira claimed the bunk nearest the entrance, a habit from ranch life, where she'd always positioned herself between her family and potential threats. "Settle in and report to the Tactical Operations Center in 1 hour," Sullivan instructed. "We'll receive our first mission briefing, and meet the infantry unit we'll be supporting. The TOC was a climate-controlled trailer filled with communications equipment, computer workstations, and map displays showing the current tactical situation throughout their area of operations. Major Patricia Stone, the base commander, was a competent officer in her early 40s whose no-nonsense demeanor suggested someone who'd earned her position through performance rather than politics. Intelligence indicates increased Taliban movement in grid squares 847 and 851. Major Stone began pointing to areas on the digital map display. They're likely establishing supply caches for winter operations and recruiting fighters from local villages. Your team will provide overwatch for patrol operations designed to disrupt these activities. Kira studied the terrain features on the map, noting elevation changes, sight lines, and potential shooting positions. The area was mountainous with sparse vegetation, challenging for concealment, but excellent for long-range engagements if you could find the right position. "Ma'am, what's the typical engagement range in this area?" Kira asked. Major Stone looked up from the map, her eyes assessing the young specialist who'd asked the question. "Highly variable. Taliban forces prefer close-range ambushes using the terrain for concealment, but they'll also engage at longer ranges when they have positional advantages." She highlighted several locations on the map. "These ridge lines have been used for previous attacks against our patrols. We've identified at least 3 Taliban marksmen in this area with confirmed kills beyond 600 meters. Sullivan stepped forward. "Major, how current is our intelligence about enemy sniper capabilities in this sector?" "Current enough to be concerned," Stone replied. "They're using a combination of Soviet-era rifles and more modern weapons acquired from various sources. Some of these shooters are experienced veterans of conflicts going back to the Soviet occupation. Don't underestimate them." The briefing continued with details about friendly force movements, communication protocols, and rules of engagement specific to the area's complex political and cultural environment. Kira learned that effective operations required understanding not just military tactics, but also tribal relationships, religious considerations, and economic factors that influence local support for various factions. Their first mission launched before dawn 3 days later. Kira and her team would provide overwatch for a patrol investigating reports of weapons caches in a village called Tangi, located in a valley surrounded by ridgelines that offered excellent fields of fire for anyone with the high ground. "Ashford, your shooting position will be on Hill 472, Sullivan explained as they studied the approach route on a terrain map. 820 meters from the village center. Clear sight lines to all major buildings and approaches. Calloway will spot and coordinate with the patrol leader." Kira felt the familiar calm that preceded challenging shots settle over her. This was what months of training had prepared her for real-world application of marksmanship skills with genuine consequences for success or failure. The patrol consisted of 14 soldiers from the 101st Airborne Brigade, led by Lieutenant Owen Halstead, a competent 25-year-old on his second deployment. Halstead's approach to operations balanced aggressive tactics with careful risk assessment, and his soldiers displayed the professional competence Kira had learned to recognize during training. "Ashford, understand that once we're in the village, you're our insurance policy," Halstead explained during the final briefing. "If we encounter resistance, your job is to eliminate threats that our ground forces can't handle safely." "Clear." "Understood, sir. What are the priority targets if contact is initiated?" "Anyone with weapons who poses a direct threat to the patrol. But remember, this is a complex environment where not everyone with a weapon is necessarily hostile. Positive target identification is critical. We can't afford another civilian casualty incident like what happened to 3rd Platoon last month." The approach to Hill 472 required a 3-hour movement through terrain that reminded Kira of Montana's mountains, but with crucial differences. The vegetation was sparser, the rock formations more jagged, and the air carried sounds and smells that spoke of human presence in ways American wilderness never did. Kira established her shooting position with methodical care, arranging equipment to provide stable firing platforms while maintaining concealment from observation. The M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle she'd been issued was significantly more sophisticated than her grandfather's equipment had been, but the fundamental principles remained constant. "Range to village center," Kira requested, settling behind her rifle. Calloway studied the target area through his spotting scope, his mind already processing distances and environmental factors with the analytical precision she'd come to rely on. 780 meters to the main buildings. Wind southeast at 12 knots. Temperature rising should be stable for the next 2 hours. Atmospheric conditions are ideal. Through her scope, Kira watched the patrol begin their approach to Tangi. The village appeared peaceful: children playing in dusty streets, women tending gardens, men working with livestock. It was difficult to imagine this quiet scene containing the weapons caches that intelligence reported. Overwatch, this is Ranger 6, Lieutenant Halstead's voice crackled through the radio. Beginning search of Compound 1. Maintain eyes on and report any suspicious movement. Kira tracked the patrol's movement through her scope, noting their professional approach to clearing buildings and their respectful interaction with villagers. The soldiers were clearly experienced in these operations, maintaining security while avoiding unnecessary intimidation of civilians. The first indication of trouble came not through her scope, but through sounds that carried across the barley: shouting voices, running footsteps, and the distinctive metallic sounds of weapons being prepared for action. Movement on the eastern ridgeline, Calloway reported, his voice tight with tension. Multiple personnel with weapons approximately 1,200 meters from our position. Kira shifted her aim toward the reported location, scanning the distant ridgeline for targets. Through her scope, she identified 5 figures moving along a path that would bring them to positions overlooking the village. They carried weapons and moved with tactical discipline that suggested military training. Ranger 6, this is Overwatch, Sullivan transmitted. Multiple armed personnel moving to positions that could engage your location. Recommend expediting search and preparing for possible contact. Overwatch, Ranger 6 copies. Can you identify hostile intent? Kira watched the figures through her scope, noting their equipment and movement patterns. They carried weapons and moved with purpose, but their intent remained unclear until one of the figures unlimbered what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, aiming it toward the village where Halstead's patrol was still conducting their search. Ranger 6 Overwatch, definite hostile intent confirmed. RPG team preparing to engage your position. Overwatch, permission to engage. Kira's world narrowed to the precise calculations required for a 1,200-meter shot in variable wind conditions. The target was partially concealed behind rocks, presenting a difficult angle and limited exposure time. Range 1,200 meters, Calloway confirmed, his voice steady despite the urgency. Wind southeast at 15 knots. Temperature differential calculated. Target moving toward firing position. Kira's breathing slowed as she entered the focus state that made exceptional shooting possible. Through her scope, she watched the enemy fighter position his RPG launcher, calculating the precise moment when he would be exposed enough for an effective shot. The moment came, the fighter steadying the launcher against his shoulder, presenting a clear profile. Kira's shot broke clean and true, the bullet covering 1,200 meters in less than 2 seconds. Through her scope, she watched the target collapse, his weapon tumbling down the rocky slope. Target down, Calloway confirmed, his voice carrying a note of awe. Excellent shot, Ashford. First round hit at 1,200 meters. But the engagement was far from over. The remaining enemy fighters had identified Kira's shooting position and began returning fire. Their bullets struck rocks near her position, sending stone fragments flying and forcing her to adjust her stance. Overwatch, taking effective fire from eastern ridgeline, Sullivan reported calmly. Ranger 6, recommend immediate extraction from village. The firefight continued for 22 minutes, with Kira engaging targets at extended range, while Halstead's patrol fought their way out of the village under covering fire. By the time the shooting stopped, Kira had made 4 confirmed kills at ranges between 850 and 1,400 meters, establishing herself as a formidable precision shooter in actual combat conditions. But the real test came that evening when Kira sat alone in her quarters, processing the reality of having taken human lives for the first time. The faces of the men she'd killed remained vivid in her memory, distinct individuals she'd seen through magnified optics at the moment of death. The weight of her actions settled on her shoulders like a physical burden she couldn't shake. Calloway found her sitting on her bunk, staring at her hands with an expression that hadn't been there that morning. "Ashford, you okay?" he asked quietly, sitting down on the adjacent bunk. Kira looked up, her eyes reflecting complexity of emotions she was still learning to process. "I keep seeing their faces, Bryce, through the scope at the moment. They were trying to kill our soldiers, and I made the right tactical decisions. But they're still dead because I pulled the trigger." Calloway was quiet for a moment before responding. Ashford, what you're feeling is normal. It means you understand the significance of what happened today. It means you're not a sociopath. Does it get easier? Calloway considered his answer carefully. No, it doesn't get easier. But you learn to carry the weight without letting it compromise your ability to protect your fellow soldiers. The men you killed today were preparing to kill Americans to kill Halstead and his troops. You saved lives by taking lives. I know that intellectually, Kira said quietly. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. They are, Calloway agreed. And the day you stop feeling the weight of these decisions is the day you should stop being a soldier. Sullivan joined them a few minutes later, carrying 3 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd had this conversation before with young soldiers experiencing combat for the first time. Ashford, I debriefed your actions with Lieutenant Halstead and Major Stone, Sullivan said, handing her a cup. Your shooting today was exceptional and your decisions were tactically sound. He paused. But I'm more interested in how you're processing what happened than I am in the technical performance. It's harder than I expected, Kira admitted. Training prepares you for the mechanics, but not for the reality. Good, Sullivan said firmly. Soldiers who aren't affected by killing either haven't fully understood what they've done, or they lack the empathy that makes them effective in complex operational environments like this one. Over the following weeks, Kira's reputation as an exceptional marksman spread throughout FOB, Chapman, and beyond. Intelligence officers began requesting her team for specific high-value target missions. Infantry units specifically asked for her overwatch support during dangerous operations. Word of the 18-year-old sniper with impossible accuracy reached battalion and brigade headquarters. But with recognition came pressure and expectations that began affecting Kira's performance and mental state. She heard the whispered conversations, some praising her skills, others questioning whether the attention was warranted or whether she was being promoted beyond her experience level. Ashford's getting overconfident. She overheard one soldier telling another during evening chow. 6 weeks in country and she thinks she's Chris Kyle reincarnated. The comment stung because Kira knew it contained truth. Success in combat had given her confidence that occasionally crossed the line into arrogance. She'd begun taking risks that more experienced soldiers wouldn't consider prudent, and she'd started to believe her own legend. The reckoning came during a mission in her 7th week of deployment. Intelligence had located a Taliban regional commander in a compound 1,420 meters from the nearest viable shooting position. The target description was generic male late 40s, gray beard, brown pakol hat, walking with a noticeable limp from an old wound. The commander had been coordinating attacks against supply convoys for months, and his elimination was a high priority. Kira scanned the compound through her scope, searching for the target among the various figures moving through the buildings. Then she saw him, a man matching the description perfectly. Graybeard, pakol hat, and yes, a distinct limp as he walked across the courtyard. I have positive identification on the primary target, Kira reported. Calloway studied the same figure through his spotting scope, his analytical mind processing what he saw. Ashford confirmed again before engagement. The description is fairly generic, could match multiple individuals. Kira felt a flash of irritation. She'd been making successful identifications and shots for weeks. Calloway's caution felt like doubt in her abilities. Confirmed, graybeard, brown pakol, distinctive limp. It's him taking the shot. The mechanics of the shot were perfect. 1,420 meters wind compensation calculated, precisely elevation adjustment, exact. The bullet flew true and the target dropped instantly. But Calloway's scope revealed a horror that would haunt Kira for the rest of her life. A small child, perhaps 6 years old, ran to the fallen man screaming. The ground team's radio transmission confirmed what Kira's heart already knew. Civilian down, not the target, local shepherd, elderly male. The actual Taliban commander had been inside the building 300 meters behind where Kira had taken her shot. She'd killed a 68-year-old goat herder who was teaching his grandson how to tend animals. A man whose only crime was matching a vague description and being in the wrong place when an overconfident sniper was looking for a target. Kira felt the world tilt. No, I confirmed the description. Calloway's voice was cold as winter steel. You confirmed what you wanted to see. Surface details without proper verification. This is exactly why we have protocols. The investigation was swift and thorough. Major Stone benched Kira, immediately placing her on administrative leave for 2 weeks while the incident was reviewed. The findings were clear. Kira had violated positive identification protocols in her eagerness to engage what she believed was a high-value target. Specialist Ashford, you let your recent successes cloud your judgment, Major Stone said during the official reprimand. You saw a man matching superficial characteristics, and you assumed. That assumption cost an innocent life. This is precisely why we emphasize verification procedures. Calloway's words to Sullivan, overheard through the thin walls of the TOC, cut deeper than any official reprimand. I told you she wasn't ready. Genetic gifts mean nothing without judgment and discipline. Sullivan defended her publicly, but Kira saw the disappointment in his eyes, and that hurt worse than any words. The downward spiral was rapid and total. Kira stopped eating properly, sleeping became impossible, and she withdrew from her team. The next 3 patrol missions saw her hesitating on legitimate targets, second-guessing every identification, paralyzed by fear of making another fatal mistake. Lieutenant Halstead finally confronted her after a mission where her hesitation had nearly cost lives. Ashford, you're overcorrecting dangerously. We need you functional, not paralyzed. The Taliban aren't going to wait while you triple-check every shadow. Letters from Cole arrived, cheerful accounts of his plans to enlist, how proud he was of his sister, how she was his inspiration for wanting to serve. Each letter felt like a knife twisting in Kira's gut. She was nobody's inspiration. She was a killer who couldn't distinguish civilians from combatants. At 3 in the morning on her 14th night after the incident, Sullivan found Kira in the armory, field stripping her rifle for the 7th time, her hands moving mechanically while tears streamed down her face. He sat down across from her without speaking for a long moment. Then he pulled out a leather-bound journal, old, worn, with pages yellowed by decades. Your grandfather gave this to someone in '99, Sullivan said quietly. Asked that it be delivered to his granddaughter after she made her first terrible mistake. He was very specific about the timing, not before because you wouldn't understand. Not after you recovered because you wouldn't need it. But right in the middle of the darkness when you were questioning everything. Kira took the journal with trembling hands. The leather was soft with age, the binding cracked but intact. She opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The entry was dated June 4th, 1944, written in her grandfather's distinctive handwriting. I killed the wrong man today. Intelligence said he matched the description of Sturmbannführer Wilhelm Krauss, the officer coordinating German artillery positions along the Normandy coast. But after our forces advanced, we found papers on the body. He was Michel Beaumont, a French resistance courier delivering Allied intelligence to our forward units. 32 years old, wife and 2 daughters in Lyon. My bullet killed him at 890 yards. The shot itself was impeccable, perfect wind compensation, exact elevation, adjustment, textbook execution. But I killed the wrong man. I cannot undo this. I cannot bring Michel Beaumont back to his wife and daughters. I can only ensure that every shot I take for the rest of my life honors his sacrifice by being absolutely, completely, irrevocably certain. The burden never lifts, the weight never decreases. But from this failure comes the wisdom that prevents the next tragedy. The question is not whether you will fail, all humans fail. The question is whether you will let that failure destroy you, or whether you will let it forge you into someone who never makes that particular mistake again. I choose to be forged. God help me. I choose to carry this weight and use it to aim more carefully, verify more thoroughly, and value every life in my crosshairs as the precious, irreplaceable miracle it is. Kira read the entry 3 times, tears blurring the words. Her legendary grandfather, the man whose genetic gifts she'd inherited, whose mysterious legacy had drawn military attention to her, had made the exact same mistake she had, and he'd carried the weight of that mistake for 72 years. He failed too, she whispered. Sullivan nodded. He failed, carried that weight his entire life, and became the most careful, most certain shooter in military history because of it. Your mistake doesn't define you, Ashford. How you respond to it, that's what matters. The path back to functionality was neither quick nor easy. Kira requested and received additional training on positive identification procedures. She studied rules of engagement manuals until she could recite them verbatim. She developed a personal protocol requiring triple verification before any shot. When she returned to active duty, her shooting had changed. The instinctive confidence was gone, replaced by methodical certainty. She was slower to shoot, but more accurate in identification. And while Calloway remained professionally distant, she could see him watching her with something approaching cautious approval. Over the next 8 weeks, Kira made 6 confirmed high-value target eliminations, all meticulously verified according to protocol. Lieutenant Halstead noticed the change in her approach and commented on it. "Ashford's different now," he told Sullivan during a mission debrief. "More careful, more deliberate. Actually, she's better than before. The confidence is earned now instead of assumed." But Calloway's resentment still simmered beneath the surface of their professional cooperation. He performed his duties flawlessly, provided accurate calculations, and maintained proper communication. But the warmth that had begun developing before the civilian casualty incident was gone, replaced by cold efficiency. It was during their 5th month of deployment that everything changed. They were summoned to a secure briefing room where Colonel Vanessa Drummond waited, not Major Stone, but a full colonel from Joint Special Operations Command, someone whose presence at FOB Chapman indicated something significant. "Specialist Ashford, what do you know about Operation Artemis?" Drummond asked without preamble. Kira felt her heart skip. "Nothing, ma'am. Never heard of it." Drummond activated a wall-mounted display showing classified documents marked with security classifications Kira had never seen before. Operation Artemis was a genetic screening initiative launched in 1943. Military scientists identified a rare genetic variation affecting visual spatial processing, temporal cognition, and environmental reading. Approximately 0.0002% of the population carries these markers. Black and white photographs appeared on the screen, young soldiers from World War II, including a clear image of Nathaniel Ashford holding a specialized long rifle. "Your grandfather was one of the original 7 members identified. On June 5, 1944, the eve of D-Day, he eliminated General Major Klaus Steiner, the officer coordinating German defensive reinforcements to the Normandy beaches. The shot was made at 1,790 yards with 1940s-era equipment. It remained classified for 70 years. Kira stared at the documents, pieces falling into place. "You've been monitoring me, testing me. We've been protecting you," Drummond corrected, "and now we need you for something that's never been attempted in military history." A new image appeared, satellite imagery of a compound near the Pakistan border. "This is Colonel Alexei Volkov, former Russian Spetsnaz, currently coordinating Taliban weapons networks. 19 bombing attacks, 340-plus civilian casualties across 3 countries. He's meeting with cell leaders for the next 72 hours, then disappearing into Pakistan for potentially months or years." Sullivan leaned forward, studying the imagery. "What's the tactical problem, ma'am? The only viable shooting position with clear line of sight to the target area is here." Drummond highlighted a ridgeline on the map. "Range to target 4,820 meters." The room fell silent. Kira felt her breath catch. 4,820 meters, nearly 3 miles. The current world record for a confirmed military kill was 3,540 meters. Drummond was asking for something 36% beyond that, a shot that violated everything known about ballistic science and equipment capabilities. "That's impossible," Calloway said flatly. "The bullet drop alone at that distance would be 520 feet, Kira heard herself say, with a 450-foot rise before the drop. 7.2-second flight time. Wind deflection in 3 separate zones. Coriolis effect adding 22 inches of drift. Temperature differential of minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit between firing position and target area." Everyone turned to look at her. She realized she'd calculated the entire solution while Drummond was still explaining the problem, her mind processing the variables faster than conscious thought could track. Drummond smiled slightly. "Your grandfather made 1,790 yards with World War II technology. We believe you can shatter the modern record with current systems. The M110 you've used for standard missions will be replaced for this operation, a custom 338 Lapua Magnum designed specifically for extreme range engagements." Kira thought of the civilians she'd killed, the weight of that mistake, the certainty that another error at nearly 3 miles could be catastrophic. "And if I hit another innocent person at that distance, then we abort extract and find another solution," Sullivan said. "But Ashford, I think this is what all the pain was preparing you for. Redemption through precision. A shot so carefully planned, so meticulously verified that failure isn't possible. Calloway stood abruptly. This is insane. She barely passed psychological evaluation after killing a civilian. Now you want her shooting 3 miles, the mathematics alone. Then make the mathematics work, Sullivan interrupted. That's your job, specialist. You're the best ballistic calculator I've ever worked with. If anyone can create solutions for this shot, it's you. Calloway looked at Kira, something complicated passing across his face. Every time you look through that scope, I see my sister in someone's crosshairs. Every time you pull a trigger, I remember Corporal Elise Calloway bleeding out in the Syrian desert because some sniper made a bad call. The room went silent. Sullivan's expression shifted to understanding. Kira met Calloway's eyes steadily. Then be my conscience, Bryce. Your calculations and your caution are what prevent me from becoming the shooter who killed your sister. I need you to keep me honest. I need you to tell me if the shot isn't right, if the verification isn't complete, if any part of this mission violates the protocols we're supposed to follow. Something in Calloway's expression cracked the wall he'd maintained since the civilian casualty incident, finally showing fissures. You really mean that? I killed an innocent man because I was overconfident and didn't listen to caution, Kira said quietly. I will never make that mistake again. Your skepticism, your demands for verification, your sister's memory, they're what keep me from becoming someone I never want to be. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. Then almost reluctantly, he nodded. If we're doing this, if we're attempting the impossible, we do it with every safeguard in place. Triple verification on target identification. Abort criteria at every stage. And if I call the shot unsafe, we stop. No arguments. Agreed, Kira said immediately. Drummond watched this exchange with approval. Specialized equipment arrives tonight. You have 72 hours to plan, prepare, and execute. After that, Volkov disappears, and we may not get another chance for years. That night, while Calloway worked on ballistic calculations and Sullivan coordinated with higher command, Kira sat alone with her grandfather's journal reading the entries he'd made after killing Michelle Beaumont. June 7, 1944. We landed at Normandy today. The beaches ran red, but I carry Michelle's name in my heart with every shot I take. His death must mean something. It must make me better, sharper, more careful. Otherwise, I killed him for nothing. June 15, 1944, made 3 shots today at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Each verified 3 times before trigger, press. Each confirmed as German combatants. Michelle's daughters will never know their father, but perhaps other daughters will know theirs because I learned to aim more carefully. July 23, 1944. The weight never lightens, but it focuses me. Every calculation more precise. Every verification more thorough. This is how we honor the dead, by never repeating the mistakes that killed them. Kira touched both compasses in her pocket, her grandfather's, from 1944, and its twin made for her in 1952. 2 pieces of brass connected across generations by the same burden, the same gift, the same terrible responsibility. Tomorrow the real preparation would begin. 72 hours to plan a shot that rewrote the possible. A shot that would either redeem her mistake or compound it beyond measure. A shot nearly 3 miles distant with consequences that would echo far longer than the 7 seconds it took the bullet to fly. True aim serves the heart. She was about to discover if her heart could bear the weight of aiming at something impossible. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation that felt simultaneously endless and too brief. Specialized equipment arrived on a night helicopter, a custom .338 Lapua Magnum rifle that represented the cutting edge of long-range technology built specifically for shots that defied conventional ballistic science. Calloway attacked the mathematical challenge with obsessive precision, creating calculation matrices that covered every conceivable environmental variable. Wind speeds from 5 to 50 knots, temperatures from -25 to +55 Celsius, humidity levels, air density at different elevations, Coriolis effect calculations for their specific latitude, spin drift compensation for a 7.2-second bullet flight. But beneath his professional focus, Kira could sense the internal struggle. Late on the second night, as they reviewed trajectory tables for the 100th time, Calloway's composure finally cracked. This is insane, he said suddenly, pushing back from the table. You barely cleared psychological evaluation after the civilian incident. Now they want you shooting 3 miles. The mathematics are one thing, but the human element. Then help me get the human element right, Kira interrupted. Your calculations can be perfect, but if I'm not mentally ready, if I'm not absolutely certain, we abort. That's the agreement, remember. Calloway met her eyes, and for the first time since the civilian casualty, she saw something other than professional distance in his expression. My sister died because someone made a bad call at 940 meters. You're talking about 5 times that distance. If you make the same mistake, then you'll be there to stop me, Kira said firmly. That's why we're partners, Bryce. Your sister's memory, your caution, your absolute refusal to let me take shortcuts. That's what makes this possible. I'm not asking you to trust my instincts. I'm asking you to verify every single one of them. Something shifted in Calloway's expression, the wall he'd maintained finally crumbling. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, but I call abort criteria at every stage. No arguments. No arguments, Kira agreed. The insertion happened on the third night a helicopter dropped 16 kilometers from their target position. The movement to the ridgeline took 5 hours through terrain that tested every skill Kira had developed in Montana's mountains. They passed within 200 meters of a sleeping Afghan village, and Kira found herself thinking about the families inside those stone houses. Children dreaming, parents worrying, people trying to survive in a land that had known too much war for too many generations. These people deserve better, she whispered to herself as they climbed higher into the mountains. They do, Sullivan replied quietly, having overheard. But sometimes better requires removing people like Volkov, who profit from their suffering. They reached their shooting position with 90 minutes to spare before the target window opened. Kira established her hide with methodical care, every movement deliberate, the custom. 338. Lapua felt different from any weapon she'd used, heavier, more precise, like holding a surgical instrument designed for impossible surgery. Environmental assessment, Sullivan requested as dawn began painting the eastern sky. Calloway deployed his equipment with practiced efficiency. 3 distinct wind zones, he reported after 15 minutes of observation. Our position 14 knots southeast, mid-valley 24 knots lateral west to east, target area 9 knots shifting northeast to east. Kira absorbed the information, her mind already beginning the complex calculations. Temperature differential, ridge position 34 Fahrenheit, valley floor 71. That's a minus 36-degree gradient over 4,820 meters. Bullet trajectory will rise 450 feet, then drop 520, Kira murmured, visualizing the path. Coriolis effect adds 22 inches right deflection. 7.2-second flight time means target could move 18 feet between trigger and impact. Which is why we need him stationary, Sullivan said, and why we have abort criteria. If conditions aren't perfect, we extract and try another approach. The waiting was the hardest part. Through her scope, Kira watched the compound come to life as the sun rose. Vehicles arrived. Armed men established security positions. The meeting Volkov had called was clearly important. She counted at least 30 fighters in the compound. Movement at main structure, Calloway reported 40 minutes into their observation. Multiple high-value targets visible, but no positive ID on primary objective yet. Then, precisely as intelligence had predicted, a distinctive figure emerged from the main building. Kira's scope found him immediately late 40s, bearing the confidence of command, and most importantly, the burn scar on his left cheek that matched Volkov's intelligence photograph. I have possible primary target, Kira said carefully, years of training and bitter experience making her cautious. Male late 40s, burns scar left cheek, matching intelligence photo. Calloway shifted to his spotting scope, studying the same target. Confirming burn scar. Distinctive walk pattern matches description, old knee injury, right leg. Sullivan used his binoculars to verify. Facial features consistent with Volkov's known photographs. Clothing matches expected profile. Security detail behavior suggests high-value individual. Kira continued watching, refusing to rush. The man conferred with associates, gestured toward vehicles, moved through the compound with authority. Every behavior matched what they knew about Volkov. Second verification, Kira said, comparing facial structure to intelligence photos, eyes, nose, cheekbones, all consistent. Scar tissue pattern exact match. Concur, Calloway confirmed. Additionally, he's directing others clear command presence. Security positioning around him indicates protected principle. Third verification. Kira said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, waiting for additional confirming behavior. They watched as Volkov moved to inspect weapons laid out on tables, the arms dealing that intelligence had reported. He picked up an RPG launcher, examined it with professional competence, demonstrated loading procedures to the watching men. The actions of someone with military training, someone comfortable with advanced weapon systems. That's our target, Sullivan said finally. Specialist Ashford, you are cleared to engage when conditions permit. But Kira didn't shoot, not yet. She watched Volkov's movement pattern, noting that he paced through an 8-meter zone in the courtyard, occasionally stopping to speak with associates. She needed him stationary. She needed the wind stable. She needed everything to align. Conditions assessment, she requested. Calloway checked his instruments. Valley wind currently gusting, 26 knots, now 22, holding at 23, but unstable. They waited. 10 minutes passed. 15. Kira's breathing remained controlled, her heart rate steady despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. This wasn't just the longest shot in military history. This was redemption. This was proving she'd learned from her catastrophic mistake. This was honoring the shepherd she'd killed by making absolutely certain this time. And then it happened. Volkov stopped walking and stood alone in the center of the courtyard. At the same moment, a cloud passed overhead, reducing the heat mirage. The valley wind dropped from 23 knots to 18 and stabilized. Kira felt it, what her grandfather had called the moment of convergence. When physics and fate aligned. When all variables briefly resolved into something approaching certainty. Bryce, she said quietly, I have optimal conditions. Right now. But I need your final calculations. Calloway checked his instruments one last time. Wine Valley at 18 knots steady, temperature gradient holding. Target stationary, all variables within acceptable range for engagement. He paused, then added, Kira, this is as good as it's going to get. If we're doing this, it's now. Sullivan. Your call, Ashford, the sergeant said. Only you can make this decision. Kira thought of her grandfather in France, 1944, facing an impossible shot. She thought of Michel Beaumont, the wrong man killed. She thought of the shepherd in Afghanistan, another wrong man. She thought of Calloway's sister bleeding out in Syria because someone made a bad call. She thought of the compasses in her pocket, 2 pieces of brass spanning 80 years connecting her to a legacy of precision and responsibility. And she knew, not hoped, not believed, knew. Every variable aligned, every verification complete, every abort criterion satisfied. Her breathing slowed to 4 breaths per minute. The world narrowed to reticle and target. Her finger took up the 3.5 pounds of pressure on a 4-pound trigger. She exhaled to her natural respiratory pause and held. The shot broke clean. 1, Calloway counted, his voice steady. 2, 3. Through her scope, Kira maintained sight picture, watching Volkov still standing unaware. 4, 6. The world held its breath. 7. Through her scope, Volkov suddenly staggered, grasped his chest, and collapsed. Target down, Calloway's voice cracked with emotion. Center mass, holy God, you did it. 4,820 meters. Confirmed kill. Sullivan's voice carried controlled excitement. That's a world record by 1,280 meters. Ashford, you just rewrote military history. But Kira barely heard them. She watched through her scope as chaos erupted in the compound. Fighters scattering. Volkov's lieutenants turning weapons on each other, suspecting internal betrayal because no one could believe a shot from this distance. 4 secondary casualties from factional fighting, Calloway reported. They think it was inside job. Networks collapsing. Which is why we're leaving immediately, Sullivan said. Pack up, 30 seconds. The extraction became a gauntlet. 40-plus fighters mobilized across the valley, conducting systematic searches. Weather deteriorated as a sandstorm approached from the west, threatening their helicopter extraction. They moved 4 kilometers through hostile terrain, every shadow potentially concealing enemy fighters. The ambush came at the landing zone, 4 Taliban fighters already positioned, waiting. The close quarters fight was brief and brutal. Sullivan and Calloway engaged from flanking positions, while Kira used her sidearm for the first time in combat at ranges under 15 meters. The necessary violence of it felt completely different from precision, shooting, immediate personal visceral. When the helicopter finally arrived, dust swirling in the rotor wash, Kira climbed aboard and looked back at Afghanistan spread below. Beautiful and heartbreaking, a land that had tested her and transformed her in ways she was still processing. The debriefing with Colonel Drummond was classified at levels Kira hadn't known existed. Your 4,820-meter shot is now the longest confirmed kill in military history, Drummond said. It will remain classified top secret for a minimum of 50 years, exactly like your grandfather's shot. Will anyone ever know, Kira asked. The people who need to know already do, Drummond replied. And 50 years from now, when it's declassified, maybe your own granddaughter will learn about it and understand her inheritance. Calloway approached Kira privately after the debriefing. I'm writing you up for a valor citation. It won't be public, but you deserve recognition. I don't need medals, Bryce. I needed to prove I could do it right after doing it so wrong. You did more than that, Calloway said quietly. You honored my sister's memory by showing what it looks like when someone actually learns from tragedy instead of just carrying guilt. 7 months later, Kira returned to Montana on leave. The ranch was saved, military bonuses and combat pay had cleared the debt and provided cushion for future operations. Cole had graduated basic training with honors and been assigned to combat medic school, a non-combat specialty. I decided I want to save lives, not take them, Cole explained as they sat on the ranch porch watching sunset paint the crazy mountains. You showed me what responsibility really costs. That made me think about what I actually wanted to contribute. On her third day home, an unmarked sedan pulled up the long driveway to the ranch house. An elderly man emerged, moving with the careful precision of someone managing old injuries but maintaining dignity. He appeared to be in his mid-80s with silver hair and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Specialist Ashford, the man said, extending his hand. Colonel Robert Kincaid, United States Army, retired. I served with your grandfather, Nathaniel, in 1944. Kira shook his hand, feeling strength that belied his age. You knew Grandpa Nate. We were partners in Operation Artemis, Kincaid said. He asked me to deliver something if an Ashford ever matched his achievement. After what happened in Afghanistan, he smiled slightly, I'd say you more than matched it. From a wooden box, Kincaid withdrew a custom metal, brass and silver showing a bow over crosshairs surrounded by a laurel wreath. The engraving read, For the shot others deemed impossible, N.A. Nathaniel had this commissioned in 1944 after his impossible shot, Kincaid explained. He believed someday someone in his bloodline would need it. But it was the second item in the box that made Kira's breath catch. Another brass compass identical to the two she carried. Wait, Kira said, pulling out both compasses she already possessed. I have these two. Why is there a third? Kincaid's expression softened with something like wonder. I didn't know about the second one. Nathaniel must have made 3 total. One for himself, which you found. One for his direct descendant, which your mother gave you. And this one, he turned it over to reveal the engraving, For the one who follows true. May all who aim carry this wisdom. N.A. 1952. He knew there would be others, Kira whispered. After me, the legacy continuing. 6 of us remain active globally in various capacities, Kincaid said. When you're ready, and only when you're ready, there's more work. Shots that need taking, lives that need saving, legacies that need honoring. The Artemis program didn't end with Nathaniel. It didn't end with you. It continues as long as people with this gift choose to serve something larger than themselves. After Kincaid departed, Kira stood on the ridgeline behind the ranch house, teaching Cole basic rifle fundamentals. The same ridgeline where Nathaniel had taught her father, where her father had taught her, where the legacy passed through generations like a compass pointing true north. How do you know when to take the shot? Cole asked, settling behind the rifle. Kira thought of Michelle Beaumont, of the Afghan Shepherd, of Alexei Volkov, of 7.2 seconds that spanned 3 miles and carried the weight of lives saved and lives lost. When you're training, your conscience and your responsibility all align perfectly, she said finally. And even then you verify 3 times, because every trigger pull echoes across lifetimes. She touched the 3 compasses in her jacket pockets, her grandfather's from 1944. her twin from 1952, and now the legacy compass meant for those who would follow. They classified it as the shot that changed a war, she said quietly, more to herself than Cole. But it was really the shot that changed me. From a girl trying to save her family's ranch to a guardian protecting families I'll never meet. That's Grandpa Nate's real legacy. Not the distance, not the record, the responsibility that comes with the gift. The sun set behind the crazy mountains, painting the sky in gold and purple. Montana had raised her, shaped her, and now welcomed her home. But she understood now that home wasn't just a place. It was a purpose, a legacy, a responsibility passed through generations of Ashfords who'd learned that true aims serve the heart. And her heart, tested by failure and forged by redemption, now aimed at something larger than herself. The work would continue. The legacy would endure. And someday perhaps another Ashford would stand on this ridgeline holding these compasses, understanding that the greatest shots weren't measured in distance. They were measured in lives saved, in responsibilities honored, in legacies earned through blood, sweat, tears, and the absolute certainty that came from aiming true.